So I get asked to provide the neuroscience of things a lot. One of the most common is around cold showers and cold exposure, and I've realized people need to know some of the crazy benefits around these practices. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cody. I'm a neuroscientist that helps developers and people in their 20s and 30s beat quarter-life crises and the feelings that come with that. So, if you're here, you probably are familiar with Wim Hof and some of the extremists who choose to take cold showers instead of hot ones. I'm one of those people. And by the end of this video, you'll have no reason not to start taking them too. So let's get started. First, there are many different ways those extremists, and soon hopefully yourself, can choose to go about achieving cold exposure. People do anything from a cold shower, a cold plunge, an ice bath, to actually jumping in the Arctic Ocean. Tony Robbins is one of the first people I personally heard referencing this type of practice. His routine is jumping into a mini pool that's just above freezing temperature. You may have also heard of the Iceman, otherwise known as Wim Hof. He's one of the best studied humans in history for the things he's been able to do around cold exposure. Some of those things include running a half marathon above the Arctic Circle barefoot, only wearing shorts, swimming underneath ice for 66 meters, climbing the highest mountain in the world while only wearing shorts. So, what is all the hype about, and what does the science have to say? Let's go back 200,000 years to when our ancestors roamed the earth. Unlike today, they didn't have air conditioning or heating. In fact, they barely even had clothes to protect them from the environment. This means they were exposed to extreme conditions like the cold constantly. This put them in a constant state of what is called hormesis, which basically means what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So when we are in a state of hormesis, our body adapts and renews itself. It is how we have survived evolutionarily, and it works still today. Most of us are more familiar with hormesis than we think. If you've ever lifted weights or ran, you know that putting your muscles and body through controlled stress over time makes you stronger. The same is true for cold exposure. The only exception is it's not just your muscles, it's your entire central nervous system, your cardiovascular system, your endocrine system, your immune system having to work out and adapt to the extreme temperatures all at once. Instead of just strength gains, you get a whole host of hormetic effects that benefit you. So let's dive a little bit deeper into what some of these benefits are for each part of your body that is experiencing hormesis. First up is the cardiovascular system. This is the body system that is responsible for our blood circulation, which helps get nutrients to our cells, clears out waste from our bodies, and gets our immune cells to the areas that they are needed the most. The heart is its engine for transporting the blood through our bodies, along with the millions of micromuscles that line our vessels or highways inside of us like our arteries, veins, and capillaries. These would span about 100,000 miles if we took them out of us. For most of us, the extra micromuscles within our vessels grow weak over time because we get a desk job or we don't use them enough, which makes our heart's job much harder. Cold exposure shocks these micromuscles the same way weight training shocks your muscles. And over time, this causes the heart rate of someone who has consistently been practicing cold exposure to decrease by 20 to 30 beats per minute. This is because you're strengthening those micromuscles, and your heart doesn't have to work nearly as hard to pump the blood around your body, making your cardiovascular system much more efficient. This means it can deliver nutrients more effectively, clear out our systems more efficiently, and pump our immune cells to the places they need to be much faster. Next up, the immune system. Like I just mentioned, this system is traveling through our blood. With the heart and vascular system in hyperdrive from cold exposure, the immune system is now seeing the downstream benefits and effects. The most important of which is increasing our overall immunity to pathogens and decreasing our inflammation levels. And if you didn't know, chronic inflammatory diseases have been recognized as the most significant cause of death in the world today, accounting for more than 50% of the total deaths worldwide. And yes, in moderation, inflammation can be hugely beneficial, like when you get a bug bite and the area swells to block the poison from traveling anywhere else in the body. But when it's chronic, it can lead to arthritis, cancer, diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and even mental illness. So lowering inflammation is a huge part of living a healthy life. And with that vascular system on overdrive, more blood is getting to more places efficiently, meaning more nutrients are being delivered to where they need to be, and more waste can leave the area, which includes unneeded inflammatory cells and cytokines that are responsible for causing inflammation. And this hyperdrive also increases the level of white blood cells dramatically, which are the cells that make up your immune system and are responsible for trapping pathogens as they enter your body. So naturally, with more white blood cells flowing through your body, your immunity spikes, meaning you get sick less often. And when you do get sick, it's for a shorter amount of time because more of these cells are there to stop the invading pathogens, toxins, and bacteria. Next up, your metabolism. This is a measurement of how well your body is breaking down and using glucose for energy. And deliberate cold exposure can increase your metabolism by 350%. Yes, 350%. Cold showers do this so dramatically because they increase brown fat, which then causes increased insulin sensitivity. Brown fat is created when we are cold to help us warm up our body's internal organs. It's called brown fat because it has more mitochondria inside of it, making them appear darker. Mitochondria are what power our cells. They use the glucose in our blood to create the energy that allows us to live. So therefore, cold exposure causes our bodies to turn as white fat, which is the type we're all familiar with, into brown fat. It does this because white fat doesn't help us warm up our bodies in the same way that brown fat does, given that all the mitochondria are able to produce more energy. Having more brown fat also increases our insulin sensitivity because the more mitochondria we have, the more effectively we can uptake glucose. All of this decreases our risk for diabetes and insulin resistance. Finally, the nervous system. This is one of the largest beneficiaries of cold exposure and all of the downstream positive effects of the other systems we just talked about. Some of the most notable benefits may blow your mind a little bit. A 530% increase in norepinephrine, a 250% increase in dopamine, and a decrease in the cortisol that's in our blood, our stress chemical. This increases goal-directed behavior and focus, decreases anxiety, depression, and stress, and increases your mood. The most important of all of these benefits is the effect cold exposure has on our fight-flight system. This is the portion of our nervous system responsible for the 530% increase in norepinephrine. When we are deliberately exposed to cold, it causes your brain and body to release this chemical into your blood. This is probably the most important benefit of deliberate cold exposure because norepinephrine is the main driver of most of the benefits we have talked about so far. For example, norepinephrine released into our white fat cells triggers the production of mitochondria, which is how white fat turns into brown fat. In relation to mental health, norepinephrine releases and triggers dopamine, which is why we see a 250% increase in dopamine. These are the two main neurochemicals connected to depression, anxiety, ADHD, and so many other things. People who struggle with these types of mental health issues have lower levels of both of these chemicals. So cold exposure increases these chemicals and has been shown to be more effective and last longer than any other traditional medication that is usually prescribed for these types of things. And finally, norepinephrine and dopamine hone our focus, literally increasing our goal-directed behavior, which is a really fancy way to say it increases your motivation and drive towards your goals. So, knowing what you know now about hormesis and cold exposure, I hope you're interested in adding some level of deliberate cold exposure into your routine. For those of you who are, I figured adding some tips and tricks on just that would be helpful. First of all, you don't need to jump into a cold lake as your first attempt to add some kind of cold exposure to your life. There are various options. For example, you could start by splashing cold water on your face. Even this small act has some of the beneficial effects we covered today. A lot of people I work with start by taking a hot shower, but at the end, they turn the water to cold for 30 seconds and then warm it back up again. As you progress, you can start to take the cold for longer, eventually shifting to a full-on cold shower instead of a warm shower. Other people prefer plunges into ice baths like Tony Robbins, or even extremists like Wim Hof like to jump into frozen lakes or take a swim in the Arctic Ocean. And as this type of practice is hitting the mainstream, there are even plunge pools at certain country clubs I know of, or cryotherapy chambers. There are tons of ways to install this practice into your life. Last thing, let's cover some commonly asked questions. How cold is the number one? Everyone has a different tolerance, but Dr. Andrew Huberman's rule of thumb is you should be saying, whoa, this is really freaking cold, but I can survive. How long should you go for? The benefits start at as little as 30 seconds and top out around 10 minutes. Can you do this every day? Yes, and I highly recommend it. And is this dangerous? The danger level is extraordinarily low. But if you're going from never, ever doing any type of cold exposure to jumping into the Arctic Ocean with no training, you could run into some problems. But for the average person, this is a very low risk activity with tremendous upside. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, act on it. One of the easiest ways to start a cold exposure is to practice with a buddy. Forward this video to a couple of friends who you believe would benefit from cold exposure and challenge them to start a 21-day challenge. If you feel extra brave, record yourself doing yours and @ me on social media. I'd love to see it. Please keep it PG and wear a swimsuit if you do. Thank you for tuning in today, and as always, live heroically.